Okay, now off to concatenation and multiplication. Like I said, when we looked at those further up, I showed you, let me just go up there. Yeah, I showed you some of the operations, and I said that some of these can be used with both strings and with numbers, and some of these can be used only with numbers. So I just want to show you, for example, that you can, in Python, concatenate. For example, here I've got my DNA sequence that is stored in DNA1, and my second one stored in DNA2. If I can add DNA1 plus DNA2, so this part here, DNA1 plus DNA2, I've used plus, and then I assigned it to a new variable called add DNA. So obviously, some people prefer to start with what needs to go in it. So they would say, for example, DNA1, DNA2, and then they would say DNA1 plus DNA2, and then afterwards they would put the variable name in front of it. Doesn't matter as long as it's intuitive. And then I print that, and you will see that it's added this part here to the back of this. Okay, this part over here. Okay, I can also multiply and use to the power of. So here I've got my poly A tail, and I said I want this to multiply by 3. And I've got 9 because 3 times 3 is 9. Okay. Python also has what is known as a length function. Again, this looks like, why must I know all of these things? But once we're going to do a couple of exercises at the end of this, and you will see how just this little bit of things that you learned now will allow you to do so many bioinformatics or solve so many bioinformatics problems. Just this little bit of things that you're learning now. Okay. So you've got a length function in Python as well, because sometimes you would want to know the length of something. Again, you will see how intuitive this is when we start to do the exercises, or how useful these are when you start to do this exercise. And you'll be thankful that Python has anticipated that you might want to use these things and have made them built in. Otherwise, you would have had to write all of this code yourself. This thing here has a lot of code at the background doing something. So it's almost like if you had DNA1 that if you write this statement out and you write this statement out and you then add the two, but what if you had called this, for example, add DNA, and you call it add DNA. Now we haven't done that yet, but it's called a function. You could turn this into a function where the person just has to say add DNA, and then they would put in there whatever they want to add, DNA1, DNA1, DNA2, DNA3, DNA4, and it will add every bit of all the little sequences of DNA together. But this is a simple one, but there might be ones that are very long. This length function here is something like that has a lot of code in the background, and all you use is the one at the end, which is len, and it actually does all the calculations for you. So here, for example, if you want to check the length of DNA1, which is this one over here, it will tell you the length is 7. And you can check it, 2, 4, 6, 7. Okay. Then you can check what's the length of it after you've added these two, for example, and it will give you. Now, so here comes the part where I was talking about whether or not sometimes you would want to convert something from the one data type. So when I say data type, I mean integer, text. I don't want to confuse you with all the others, but there are objects and other things as well. Okay, so let's say, for example, I wanted to print this into a nice little sentence that looks nice, because the person who's going to be using my code doesn't want to see all the stuff at the background, but it wants to read normal sentences in English. And so I want to say, I'm going to use this length function on DNA1, but when the person puts their DNA in, it's going to tell them the length of my first DNA sequence give the DNA sequence, is, and then give the length. So if I try to print this now, so you can see this part here, I've surrounded this by quotes. So that's going to give me that that's fine. Now I can use concatenation as well. I can say, because it's just going to add everything together, I can say the length of my DNA. I can add that. I can say is, for example, the length of my first DNA sequence plus, now this is not surrounded by quotes because this is a variable. Then I surround this by quotes again, and then I say this part here, which is length DNA. I'm going to remove this so that you can see. If I try to print this, it's going to give me errors, and it's everything in here is a problem, but for different reasons. But this specifically becomes a problem because this here, this length DNA, what is printing out here is actually an integer, and when you print things out, you can't combine strings and integers. So they either have to all be, strings, yeah. They either have to be all strings or all integers or all floats, but you can't combine the two. So how do I get around this? I can use commas, and that will separate these from each other. So if I print this, for example, it will print the length of my DNA sequence, and it will give this variable and is and the answer that is stored in this variable. Now again, I could have made this a little less, or I could have turned this into a variable as well over here by saying, by calling this, for example, length of DNA is equal to length DNA. That probably would have been the better way to do it, so that over here I could have just put in length of DNA. But let's just leave it there like that for now, because I actually want to just show you what's happening. So okay, so that one printed fine, but you could have used the string on this part over here, on this line over here. You could have used string in front of it, so that you don't have an issue with the fact that these are all strings and this is a integer. You could have converted this also to a string, so that this whole line just consists of strings. And so I have done that here, for example. I've used the concatenation, and I just want to show you something. You can see over here, maybe here it doesn't make that much sense, or you can't see that there's much of an issue, but all I want to say is when you use this plus over here, there is no space that gets created between this is here and this thing over here. So they actually print right next to each other. Okay, so I'm going to show you here. Yeah, I just converted it into, okay, I just converted something into this over here. Like I said previously, I converted a string of length DNA1. I converted this into a variable so that I could use it here and show you. But what I want to show you is these commas, when you use commas automatically makes a space between each of them. But if I print this, if I had to use concatenation, so just adding them all up, it won't give you an error, but it doesn't look very nice. Can you see they actually just paste everything together? So I prefer sometimes to just to use commas between all of these values, so that I'm going to leave that as is, because then I don't have to worry about, for example, adding plus. Otherwise you would have had to do something like this, plus and then a space, plus DNA, plus space, Do you know what I mean? And it's fine, but it's lengthy. So I'd rather just remove this plus space plus part and replace it with a comma. But it's up to you. Now, this is complicating things a bit, but just so you know, you might not use it at the start when you start to program, but there is this module, this looks like a percentage mark S, and there are other ones as well for if you want to use decimal or whatever, but you can use that as well to put the string or to replace, to be a placeholder for a string. So just so you know, if you see this, don't get alarmed and wonder what that is. It's also just so you would print it. Again, I prefer to use commas in between here, but if this over here is going to be for example, a string, which is this DNA over here, then I could have printed this and said, to show you, and said that turn this into a string over here. Okay, so there are various ways of doing it, but I just wanted to show you. In Python, there are always, in most cases, and in all coding, there are so many ways of doing it. So many people will write code for a specific thing, and depending on how their logic works, or depending on which methods they know, they may write code in completely different ways. So I'm just trying to expose you to some of the stuff that you might come across when you're reading other people's code, and also sometimes just know that there are various different ways of doing the same thing, and some of them may look a little more neater to you, or it might be just more intuitive to you, so you can choose between the different ones that you want to use. Okay, so like I said, there are many ones. This is a string operator, decimal float, for example. Again, when you see it, just so you know what it does.